think that we spent a great deal of time in the joint hearing with the Senate Human Services Committee, delving pretty deeply into CalWorks and talking specifically about workforce participation, the 24-month clock, the early intervention. So I don't feel a need to go into any more detail. I think the department is clear where we are. I'm clear where the department is. So I think we can go on. Finance or LAO have any comment on CalWorks? Then why don't we move into the oversight of CalLearn?
Sure.
Page 24 and get into the specifics.
Sure. Again, your agenda does a really nice job in just a short page here, kind of explaining where CalLearn is. CalLearn is the state's program for pregnant and parenting teens. It's been around since the early 90s, and then was made permanent when CalWorks came along in 1998. It has a system of intensive case management. It also offers a system of sanctions and bonuses related to school progress. The program was suspended in July of 2011, but restored a year later in July of 2012 from a funding and operational perspective. It did take counties phased in during the 12-13 fiscal year, and by April of 2013, all of the counties had come back. Since the restoration, and I think as your table shows in your agenda on page 24, the caseload is slightly lower than it was before. We think that may be related to the general decline in the teen birth rate, but it is a restored program. Happy to take further questions.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was having a sidebar, and I'm too old to do two things at once really well. I heard at the very end you said you thought something might have something to do with the reduction of the teen birth rate, teen pregnancy rate.
Teen pregnancy rate, yes. The caseload, as is shown on page 24, prior to the program suspension, about 11,000 cases.
Mm-hmm.
The restoration year of 12-13 back to 9,300, but even post-restoration, we're down to about 7,800 now. That is lower. I don't know for sure, but we think that may be related to an ongoing trend of a decline in the teen pregnancy rate.
Okay, because that was my question. Really trying to drill down to figure out if there is a correlation. Okay. Senator Monty, any questions on CalLearn, LAO, finance? Is there any public comment on CalLearn? Okay, we'll leave this item open for further review. Moving on to page 26 of the agenda, Welfare to Work program.
Would you like me to address some of the questions on page 28?
Please,
okay.
Please do, yes.
Again, this is more the spot to talk a little bit about SB 1041.
Yes.
I'll briefly overview, as you mentioned, the subcommittee and but the full policy committee did hear these issues. So I will give a short version, and if more is necessary,
That's
happy
perfect.
to do that.
That's fair.
Essentially, the 1041 changes were, we brought to the end the prior budgeting practice that was made during the Great Recession of essentially underfunding the program. We did not provide the counties with a full single allocation to serve all the clients because of budget constraints and specifically because of federal changes that basically said we will support income maintenance costs, but the federal government through the RL legislation did not support welfare to work services and administration. It was a budget decision, but it did have impacts on policy. To allow the counties to operationalize that, we created an additional system of young child exemptions, basically saying if you had more than 2 young children or a child under 2, you didn't need to participate. That was how counties were able to manage. We did allow clients to volunteer. But essentially, as we came into 2013, we decided, no, we can't do that anymore. We need to fund the program properly. We need to re-engage those clients. And that was a major change of 1041. Another change was essentially aligning the weekly hours of participation to the federal levels. Previously, California required 32 hours for families with, for all families with a single parent. Although the federal requirement is only 20 hours for child under 6 and 30 hours. So we aligned to those. For 2-parent families, we were always at the federal 35. We also created the 24-month flexible time period where essentially, as I was talking earlier about the federal work participation requirements, we sort of said, you don't have to follow the federal core and non-core. For 24 months, we want to maximize the flexibility and services and what a client wants and what a client needs. We don't want to be bound by federal rules about core, non-core for 2 years. That was a major change. After 2 years, the expectation is that clients would meet the federal core, non-core. I do want to say that there is sometimes a misunderstanding that federal core means work, means you must have a job. It certainly can mean that. Unsubsidized deployment is a way of meeting federal core hours, but so is subsidized employment, so is community work experience. And education, directly related employment, can count for up to 1 year. In terms of how we implement those changes, we've implemented those through an inclusive and extensive process of issuing all county letters, instructions, and regulations. More recently, we require monthly reports. We also embarked on a system of county monitoring visits. I believe I don't think we've quite gotten to all 40, but we're closing in on that. That is my answer to question 1. Further detail, or should I move on to 2?
Go ahead on to question 2, because I have some follow-up on 2 as well.
For question 2, here I will point you to the handout. Page 5 of the handout talks about it from a perspective of how many clients may indeed reach the 24-month clock and how might that work. This is what the handout shows you is our current best estimate of this. This is always going to be an evolving number. Mm-hmm. At the time of the January budget, we did not have data yet. Well, we did not have time to process the data and incorporate it into the budget regarding actual data of how clients are using the 24-month clock in the WIDTIP system. But by the time after the budget was enacted, we were able to do this. So the numbers you've seen before that we discussed with you last spring and that were in the governor's budget, they do not tie to these. But these are our best estimates, and they do tie to the all-county letters that we issued, essentially telling the counties, this is how many clients it appears may be encountering the 24-month over the next 6 months. This is what a 20% target might look like. I'll just hit a few high points from the chart. On the left-hand side, sort of in the green box, if you have the color version, talks about 6,200 having their clocks running. But as the box to the right of it says above, some clock stop for many reasons. But ultimately, we see in 15, 16, 2,500 reaching the end of their clock by the numbers we're seeing. Some will receive an extension, and you can see that in the box sort of and to the right and above that. But some will fall into that non-compliant status. I do also want to talk for a moment about that. When you come to the end, prior to even coming to the end of the 24-month clock, there is required engagement by the counties with the client. We send notices. We say, hey, you're approaching the end of that. Let's come in and talk about what you're doing, how we might be able to modify that so that you could meet the federal. Or perhaps that contact might reveal a problem. It might reveal maybe the client needed an exemption. Or it may become part of the discussion around an extension. I think that client contact is critical, and our instructions require that, and not receiving that contact would be good cause.
And I think from our perspective, some of the challenges, some of our concern about the fact that the clock is ticking, recognizing that a number of the supports that were to be put in place haven't consistently across the state yet. So that's just the issue I think you will continue to hear from the legislature pushing back on not only on all the numbers, but the numbers for fiscal year 15-16 specifically, recognizing that we're now 2 years after the implementation of that policy. And you know, the assessment tool is still needing to be launched. So many of those upfront services, just those basic tools they'll need to be successful, aren't in place.
We agree with you. The assessment tool is not in place, and CalWorks is always an evolving program with better. You know, it has better services now than it had a year ago. It'll have better services a year from now. The AB 74 changes were enacted 1 year later, but we do cop to OCAD is slower. The other programs we did bring up, the subsidized employment and the family stabilization, we did provide instruction letters, and counties are bringing those up perhaps a little.
And the fact that it's a dynamic program and services will improve year after year after year is great for those who haven't hit their time limit and are still in the program and able to benefit them. Those who have been timed out, SOL. Proceed.
I think that pretty much takes us to the end. At the very end, we give our current best estimates of how many indeed might experience the grant reduction. Again, that would be those clients who we had that county contact. They came in. We tried to write a better plan for them that could meet, but then they ultimately could not meet. Those are our best estimates of the numbers at this time. That is number 2. Turning to question 3. In terms of metrics, I think your agenda shows some of them. It shows some of the administrative data from, I think, the Welfare to Work 25. That is something we look at. As I mentioned, the monitoring visits are another metric. Also, more recently, we are now receiving reports, and counties are starting to report on family stabilization, how many clients are served. An exciting aspect of family stabilization, it's not just the adult, it can serve the whole family. And our tracking of that, we actually track both types of services. Another, beyond the administrative data, beyond our monitoring visits, beyond our regular county contacts that we have through different types of meetings that occur throughout the year, we have the RAND study. We are finalizing our data agreements right now, data sharing agreements with RAN and our county consortia. I don't have any data to share from RAN now, but we want to be transparent as interim products are developed by them. We'll be sharing those results, and those will help inform, and we'll be sharing those with the legislature. That's essentially. Pardon?
Senator Monty, before you move on to question 4.
Yeah, just a general question. If somebody hits the 24-month endpoint, they're not eligible for extensions or exemptions. Are they out forever, or is there a point that they could re-enter or reapply?
If they hit the 24 and were determined, again, it's a time for thinking about it. If they didn't get an extension, or they didn't get an exemption. If they found an exemption, they said like, wow, you really had a disability or something. Not only would they not experience the reduction at that point, but time would be added back to the clock. So I think the contact we're going to be having with the clients will do some of that. But to your question, but if that doesn't happen, the answer would be they could always come back if they could come in and write a plan to essentially meet the federal and then try to meet that. They would need to meet federal, but we would never tell someone you can't come back in and try.
And do you have
we would provide them the child care.
Right. Do you have any sense of how many people have hit that end point and then successfulay?
No one has hit it yet.
Nobody's hit it yet.
No one's hit it yet, and these are our estimates of how many will be hitting it.
Okay.
And again, I think the client contact that our counties will have will really help make sure the right, as best outcomes can happen.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Did he hit this?
Yeah, sure.
And number 4, please.
Yeah. Again, I think we've been talking about, and basically the flexible time period is something that we want the clients to take advantage of. We're very clear about that with our counties. When we hear perhaps from advocates that maybe it isn't working quite so well, we follow up with the counties on things like that. And I would just make the point that, again, at 24 months, as long as you continue to meet the federal requirements, the full program benefits continue all the way to 48 months. I think also the RAND study will help us take a closer look at what may really be happening with the 24-month clock and what actual client experience will be, because the RAND study will include client surveys as well.
And when will the RAND study be completed?
The RAND study is statutorily due to be submitted to the legislature in January of 2018. I would hope later this year, we might begin to see the beginnings of some of the first real data. The first things we'll see from RAN, this is often the case with large interventions being studied in health and human services or education, is they kind of begin with a process study, which is really just sort of, well, what did all those all-county letters look like? You know, kind of that, in terms of those kind of results and impacts, that comes later. But but again, we're, as those drafts and partials come in, that's something we would intend to share. We have a 1041 oversight work group, and we would, which includes legislative staff, and that would be a place that we would share such information.
Great. Can I roll back to CalLearn?
You may.
Briefly? We've heard it primarily anecdotally, I will acknowledge, but that the CalLearn caseload may be impacted by the fact that all pregnant parenting teens aren't being referred to CalLearn, and they're simply being nested, if you will, in CalWorks, in CalWorks families. Have you heard that? Is your data such that you would detect that at all?
I don't know that we could detect that, but if we're hearing about a lack of referrals or lack of follow-through in a certain county or in certain areas, we would want that to come to our attention, and we would follow up. It is a program that's open to all the pregnant and parenting teens if they want it.
So we will follow up with you
Okay.
on that, because that is something that we're hearing.
Okay.
I don't know, and I don't remember right now if it's from my county or from advocates generally that have come to talk to my office about it because of my past support and history with CalLearn, but we'll get back to you on that.
We believe in the program and want it to continue to succeed.
Thank you. Comments from finance or LAO on welfare to work? Any public comment on welfare to work? Seeing none, we'll move into our panel. Michelle Steve from St. John's Program for Change. Oh, that's right, she wasn't able to be here. Ms. Bartholow, well, we had invited, at the request of Senator Stone, Michelle Steve, the Executive Director of St. John's Program for Change. She was not able to be here, but we will now hear from Jessica Bartholow from Western Center on Law and Poverty. Oh, Jessica.
Yes, Madam Chairwoman. I know I'm little.
I'd seen you sitting out there, so I went right back to the seat where I'm like, why? She's not there. That's because she's at the table. And so this isn't the panel where you're going to have the other two people. That's going to be the later panel, right? The
Correct.
two clients are coming on the
And
next
the advocate
panel.
request to
Okay,
repeal the
great.
maximum.
Thank you, Ms. Bartholow, Western Center on Law and Poverty.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Madam Chairwoman, and good afternoon to Senator Manning. As you know, Western Center on Law and Poverty has been present during the budget conversations for years now, and watched the program from its inception, really, after federal welfare reform, become one of the best programs in the country to help families lift themselves and claw and scrape their way out of poverty and into blue-collar jobs and working-class jobs and some into professional-class jobs. Over the years and through the recessions and the budget cuts, we've seen the program's power to do so reduced and undermined, and the power to help people get to work and get to self-sufficiency and keep their children safe undermined. A lot of times when we talk about the CalWorks program, you hear the words incentives for work. And I'm hoping that more and more will leave those words behind as we continue to hear from low-income families that you request to come forward to you as they talk about what it is that that they see for their families, right? Low-income families who are in deep poverty, as CalWorks recipients are, with a maximum grant of no more than 42% of the federal poverty line in one of the highest cost states in the country. We hear from them that they have all the incentives that they need to get to work when they see their children and their unmet needs. We also hear, now even more so from academics, that as a parent seeing a child with unmet needs, they're more likely to experience maternal depression, which we now know undermines the development of a child, their future academic success, and the success of that parent to enter into work. So we now have a program. When welfare reform was implemented, the CalWorks program held families at 80% of the federal poverty line and is now under 50. And these parents desperately want to get to work. I haven't I haven't talked to a CalWORKs parent who doesn't want to be at work and doesn't want to have their kids at a quality childcare program and doesn't see themselves being in a, hoping for a different future. Here today to talk about the implementation of the 24-month clock and the new welfare to work rules. And I just want to acknowledge that our administrators are really some of the most diligent I've seen in the country as I compare the programs and the work that we're doing with others across the state. And to acknowledge that they haven't been given any slack by federal administrators or lawmakers. The program nationally still requires a welfare to work participation and did so even during the worst recession of our lifetime when nobody could find a job, when we had unemployment reaching 50% in our Central Valley. We were still required to find a job for people so they wouldn't be lazy and at home. And that didn't change. The bankers got a break, the loan agents got a break federally. Welfare recipients across the country did not. And so our administrators have been working under some difficult federal laws. I wish that we hadn't made the decisions that we had at the state to cut the benefit period from 60 months to 48 months during the recession, and also to move ourselves to the 24-month clock. There were some flexibilities, and I think the vision for the flexibilities in the implementation of the 24-month clock, the vision that we would marry this new 24-month clock with more flexibility and with some deep interventions for the families with great need and instability was good. Also, to increase the opportunities for assessment, so a family could contribute more to their the decisions being made about where they would be placed, and with a likelihood that they'd be more successful being placed in something where they saw themselves and where they had a propensity and the ability to achieve. But it's unfortunate the timing of that didn't come together at the same time, and so we face in July 1st. In July of 2015, we face our first families that will meet the 24-month clock. And just as a reminder, not every family will meet the 24-month clock because some families won't be on aid that long. Right. We don't have the data now, most recent data about how long people will be on aid. It used to be that the average was about 2 years. Mm-hmm. With the recession and the post-recession economy, I'm not sure those jobs that help the families leave the CalWORKs program and out of poverty exist anymore, and hopefully the RAND study will give us some more detail about that. But every family who's on longer than 24 months will hit, the 24-month clock unless they have one of those exemptions. What we would like to see in some accommodations here, acknowledging that these things didn't come together as they were intended, a shortened clock, with more flexibility and more opportunity to help the neediest. We would like to see, that we keep some of those flexibilities and the opportunities for assessment, but remove the 24-month clock. It really is an arbitrary decision to cut somebody off at 24 months, especially considering that about half of the population doesn't even have a high school degree. Mm-hmm. And that 80% of the people in the population of the CalWORKs will have seen domestic violence. Mm-hmm. We have no mandatory screening of domestic violence when people come in. We have no mandatory requirement to support them. You'll hear about that in one of the advocate proposals later. But with so many barriers that many people have, multiple barriers sometimes coming into the program, that we don't have a kind of systemic way to help them work through it for everybody, and we still impose a 24-month clock, what we see is two things. First of all, some confusion about what the flexibility is. There's flexibility, go do what you want, but oh, by the way, the 24-month clock is here and it's coming at you. It's kind of come get you. Mm-hmm. And so workers feel this kind of need to feel protection and help people meet the federal work rules so they can have exempt months. But then on the other side, this kind of message that the workers are supposed to send people out and they have this opportunity, this unique opportunity to seek education. I guess in closing, I would like to say, we have seen an erosion of the support for education in the CalWORKs program, and this was, I think, one of our gems of the program, is that it allowed for and encouraged education, and we've seen an erosion of how many people are enrolled and participating in vocational ed, and also in the community colleges, and And I think the only way we can get back to that is by removing the pressure of the 24-month clock and continuing and implementing some of the other services meant to lift people into a place where they can climb out of poverty. And thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Senator Monty? I think what we're going to do...
Madam Chair, could I have one quick comment, please?
Sure, absolutely, Mr. Bland.
I agree with Ms. Bartholow that clients who can best benefit from education, that's what they should be able to get, and that's what the 24-month clock and flexibility is about, not having to follow federal core, non-core. And if there's deficiencies there, we'll work on them. What I would point out, when you think in terms of the longer trend, though, our policy is one part of the mix. We have theoretically made it easier for education, but we also, it's not as fast as anyone would like, but we have seen the economy improving. And over the last 2 years, although education has been declining, I think your agenda points out, and I think Mr. Woolsey did some good job kind of looking at the historical statistics. We've been seeing an increase in earnings over the last 2 years. And under our system of disregards, those earnings mean a lot to those families. We've been speaking of the low level of our grant,
right.
But through the disregard, a family can earn and keep a good portion of that grant. So that as the economy recovers, that we've been seeing a trend towards earnings rather than education is not so surprising. But that said, we want what's best for the client.
And we do support Western Center on Law and Poverty. In our letter that we sent to the committee, you'll see that we are supportive of increasing that disregard. Not under the incentive for work. We don't believe that there's a disincentive for work for any very poor family,
right.
But to support work and make sure that it's not undermined by deep poverty.
Excellent. Mr. Mecca, you have a public comment on this item?
Yes.
Go right ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Frank Mecca, and I provided extensive testimony at the joint oversight hearing on the state of the implementation of the reforms from the ground, so I won't reiterate it. I just, for the record, for this hearing, I did want to point out that from our standpoint, the legislature and the governor did some very good things in creating stabilization and subsidized employment and the robust new assessment tool. But coming out of a period where we really did incredible damage to the infrastructure of the Welfare to Work program. We took over $1 billion out of the program. The Great Recession, did a number on us and our service partners. So we're emerging from that. We're implementing what is a pretty new and exciting way to think about the front end of the system, one where we assess a family holistically about everything that's going on in their lives and what we can do to improve their chances of self-sufficiency, where we can do more work with private employers. But we're doing that at a time where we've sort of been whipsawed from a policy standpoint. There's mixed messages obviously inherent in the program, and there's been a significant capacity problem in our departments and with our partner agencies, all at the same time that we've moved heaven and earth to put 3 million people on the Medi-Cal program and implement the Affordable Care Act. So I should say the federal work participation rate, the 24-month time limit, there are constraints that make this far less than ideal. But we do think some elements are there that can provide, I think, a vision for the front end of the system that's more in keeping with the legislature's intending. But it's going to take some time to weave all those elements into place. The robust assessment tool that the department is working on is really a key part of this effort, because the plans that we'll be putting together for people will derive from this new and enhanced way we're going to assess what families really need. And the department is doing a very good job in putting out a very good tool, but it's not out yet. And so as we rebuild capacity and hire staff and retrain them under the new system, try to rebuild relationships with service partners and employers, all of those tasks are going to take some time. We're working as diligently as we can. I think the department is doing the same thing. But that vision, I think, that you had when you enacted them, it's a work in progress. And we'll be completely forthright with you about how far along we think we are as we go.